So I'm now going to hand the stage over to my colleague. Here she is, the beautiful Julia Collingwood, who will run the next session with our partner Employment Hero. Julia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Hello, everyone. I'm Julia. I am People Operations Manager at Enterprise Nation. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Simon, the Head of HR Advisory at Employment Hero. We'll be looking at understanding the legal essentials for hiring and how you can make your first hire the right way. Simon, do you think we could start with a short introduction to yourself and your role at Employment Hero, please?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Simon Obi. My background is as an employment lawyer. I've done that for kind of about 20 years or so. And I've been with Employment Hero for about 8 years. We are a kind of HR, payroll, recruitment software, but we also provide advice services, so providing advice and support to small businesses on their employment journey.
Great, thank you, Simon. So I think, yeah, we'll start off with the questions. My first one for you today is, what should businesses be thinking about before hiring their first employee? And what do they need to do to get ready for this from a legal perspective?
Yeah. Oh, whoops. And I'm just trying to share
all
my
good.
slides. Can you see that?
Yeah, we're with you.
Okay. All right. So I think there's sort of 5 key things that businesses need to think about before they hire their first employee. The first one isn't a legal one as such, but I think it's really important that you understand the financial implications. Can you afford to bring someone on? Obviously, there are salary costs, there are national insurance contributions, tax, pension, all of those sorts of things. There is also, equipment, software subscriptions you might need so they can do their role. And there could be, as Brian was pointing out, recruitment costs. So you really need to kind of budget for your new hires, make sure it makes financial sense. But as Brian was saying, it's an investment in your success. So yeah, but give that some thought. There is government help available through the employment allowance, which reduces the national insurance contribution you'd otherwise have to pay. So make sure you understand that, because that's really helpful for first-time employers. And I'll provide a link to that at the end of the slide. So that's number one. Moving over to the kind of more legal side of stuff, you are required to take out employer's liability insurance for your employees. It's not a huge expense, but it is a requirement that you have that in place. That is an insurance which covers employees if they're injured at work. You will also need to register with HMRC so that you can remit tax and national insurance contributions. You need to do that really at least 4 weeks before you hire your first employee. And you will also need to, in most cases, you will need to join a pension scheme. Most employees have to be auto-enrolled into a pension. So you'll need to look at the different providers and find what works for you. And then lastly, the other big thing to think about is how you're going to organize your payroll. When we talk about payroll, we're obviously talking about paying employees their wages, but also deducting the correct amount of tax and national insurance. So yeah, there's different options for how you can do that. You can outsource that to a third party. So Employment Hero provides those services, as do lots of other providers. Or you can do it yourself. If you're doing it yourself, and certainly lots of small businesses do, you would generally need payroll software to facilitate that. Again, we provide it, as do many others. find one that works for you. That will, or it should, calculate the tax, national insurance, it'll issue pay slips, etc. But you need to get that set up in advance of hiring someone so that you're fulfilling your obligations to pay them when payday comes around.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that very clear checklist. Our next question follows on to sort of more about once businesses are more established with their hires. What do businesses need to do on an ongoing basis regarding new employees to make sure they remain compliant?
Yeah, so what I've talked about on the previous slide was really those kind of universal things that all businesses need to think about before employing anyone. But there are also a series of obligations which are going to apply on an ongoing basis every time you bring someone new in, and they will vary a bit depending on exactly the type of role you're recruiting for, etc. So the first thing, which is going to be covered in detail in a later session by Julia, is you want to make sure that you've understood the correct employment status of your new hire. So in the UK, we have this concept of contractors versus employees. Contractors, or sometimes called freelancers, are generally people running their own business and so sit outside of most of the stuff we're talking about today. Employees are people that you directly employ within your business, but even within the employee kind of definition, there are different types of employees who will have different rights and different obligations. So, for example, you can have full-time, you can have part-time, you can have people on 0 hours contracts. You might be engaging them on a fixed term basis for a set period or an ongoing basis. All these different models, I suppose, can mean you need different contracts in place, and employees might have different rights to different forms of paid leave, for example. So it's really important that you understand the status of the individual that you're bringing in and how the role is set up and what that means in terms of your obligations and their rights. That might well be something that you need to get advice on, or at least do some thinking about yourself. So that is a big one. Really important to get that right. Number two, it's kind of obvious, but you need to make sure you're paying in accordance with the minimum wage. So you need to understand how the minimum wage works. There's different rates according to the age of employees, different rates for apprentices. So again, you need to understand what your obligations are there and getting that right. The third thing that you need to do with anyone you're bringing on is check that they have legal rights to work in the UK. You can get into a lot of trouble if you employ someone and they don't have that right. For British citizens, Irish citizens, it's just checking their passport. But for foreign nationals, you'll need to make sure that they have the correct visa and rights to work in the UK. So really important you do that. That can be done online through a share code if the individual can provide you with that. Otherwise, you need to look at their actual kind of visa papers. The fourth thing, which is kind of a big one, is making sure you're issuing the right documentation to your new starters. And when we're talking about documentation, we're generally talking about employment contracts and workplace policies. So there's no actual legal requirement that an employee has to have a written employment contract. But what they do have to be given is a statement of their basic rights as an employee, which covers their pay, whether there's a probation period, their hours, that kind of stuff. It's a list set out in legislation, but is fairly, just the nuts and bolts, the bare bones of their employment terms. We would always suggest that it's in the interests of all employers to provide a more detailed employment contract, which covers the basic things that have to be provided in the statement of terms, but also goes wider, allows you to put in protections for your business about things like confidential information, intellectual property, that sort of stuff. So usually advisable to have something a bit more detailed. And then you'd be well advised also to have a number of workplace policies. Again, there's very few which there is a mandatory legal requirement for. If you've got 5 or more employees, you have to have a written health and safety policy. But generally speaking, you're not going to be breaking the law if you don't have workplace policies in place. However, you would be exposing your business to a large amount of risk if you don't have certain policies in place. For example, at a minimum, you want to have a disciplinary policy dealing with how you manage kind of misconduct, a grievance policy to show how employees can make complaints or inquiries about their employment. If you don't have those in place and there's an unfair dismissal claim against you, the compensation that you can be ordered to pay, will be heightened. Similarly, things like a sexual harassment policy. You're not breaking the law by not having it in place, but it's virtually impossible to see how you would be fulfilling your duty as an employer to prevent sexual harassment if you haven't, at the very least, got a written policy in place saying, we don't tolerate this in our workplace. This is how you bring a complaint. Obviously, that's having a written policy isn't everything you need to do, but it's the first step at least. So have a look, do some research on the kind of documents you need in place. There will be lots of providers such as Employment Hero, but many others who can provide you the templates you need for that. And then lastly, you're going to need to think about how you're going to understand your ongoing obligations to employees. So there's a whole range of rights and obligations in the employment sector. And as many people will have seen, before Parliament at the moment, we have the Employment Rights Bill, which brings in a whole range of changes, which probably will happen in 2026, which will alter the employment landscape quite significantly. So you are going to have to think about how you keep abreast of all that kind of stuff. As Brian said, there's different options. Some businesses will hire someone internally, some will go externally to providers like ourselves, and there's a range of kind of free resources out there too, which I'll point people to at the end. But yeah, it's important that you're going to think about, how am I going to understand, what types of leave someone's entitled to if they become pregnant, or what are the obligations about maximum hours and breaks at work, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, give some thinking about how you're gonna manage all that.
Brilliant, thank you. That really helps to clarify the compliance requirements. So, as well as the legal obligations, are there any best practice tips for first-time employers that you think they should be aware of?
Yeah, so this is kind of personal perspective, I suppose. And I guess I look at this from the perspective of often advising businesses when things go wrong. But I think to echo what Jeremy was saying, I think one of the keys to successful employment relations and making sure that things work as they should is is trying to make sure that your alignment, there is an alignment between your company values and the people that you're recruiting. Because if you have that in place, you know, that you have a kind of one of the key elements to success. So I think that necessarily involves thinking about what your values are, what is important to your company, what are you all about, what is the reason that you're doing what you do. And if you can boil that down to a mission statement or even like a couple of sentences, and you can put that front and center in your recruitment drive and in your job descriptions, and make sure that you're bringing on people who believe in that too, then the chances of things working out successfully are much heightened. So I think I would focus on what your values are, think about that, spend some time with your other leaders in the business if you have them, and work out exactly what that is and make that front and center of recruitment. Following on from that, I think setting clear expectations from the start with your employees is really important. You're invariably at some point in your employment journey going to have performance issues or issues of conduct, etc., with some staff, but having a clear job description, which you go through in detail with your new hires as part of bringing them on board, is a really good tool for you to be able to rely on when things, well, if things do go wrong, and hopefully get people back on track. By taking them back to like this was what we talked about when you started, this was our expectations, and this is what you need to do to meet those. It's very difficult to have those kinds of conversations about performance not being up to scratch or behavior not being as it should be if you haven't made it clear from the start. This is what we expect, and things that you might take for granted as being completely obvious for how things should work in the workplace, someone else might have a completely different experience and viewpoint. So really important, I think, to crystallize that in a job description. I think the third thing I would say is have those difficult conversations early. We very often, in the line of work we do, advise employers who come to us where they've kind of feel like they've reached the end of the line with an employee, that there's been a build-up of conduct or performance issues, and they've got to a point where they're saying, look, we just need to get them out of the business for the benefit of everyone else that works here and for productivity, etc. But if they haven't had those conversations earlier about, you know, this is what you need to do to improve, if they've kind of just let it build up and build up, because it's hard to have those conversations, it can be really tricky then to action it down the track. From a legal perspective, you know, there is usually an obligation that employees are given warnings and a chance to improve before their employment can be terminated. So it can make things really tricky if you haven't had those conversations early. And then lastly, just following on from that, of course, we all want the people we bring on to be successful and for them to stay with us and have a fruitful career. But if things aren't working, you have to own it and you need to take action. You know, if you do that early and decisively, the outcomes are going to be a lot better.
Great insights there. Thank you so much for sharing those tips. And that kind of brings us to our last question today. What resources are available that employers can use to help them with that first hire?
Yeah, so like as I said at the start, you know, we build a business about helping small businesses, but there are a range of other professionals, some brilliant people on the session today who are as equally well set up to assist small businesses. But you know, there are people out there who are there to help, and certainly we provide a lot of free resources on our website that small businesses can look at, as do other providers. So you know, that is one option. There is also a huge range of free resources. The government website, just the general government website, has some fantastic information. ACAS is the government organisation charged with providing employment information and also dealing with disputes. So they have a load of great stuff on their website. They also have a free helpline that you can call if you're looking to understand your pension obligations. The pension regulator website is really good. And then at the top, as I mentioned at the start, the employment allowance is a really key benefit to help businesses meet their national insurance contributions. So make sure you understand the eligibility for that, because particularly if this is, you know, your first hire or first couple of hires, that could be really beneficial to you in reducing the cost of your NI contributions.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Simon, for a really informative and comprehensive session today. Yeah, thank you again for all of your insights in that short window. I think that is everything from me. If you've got anything else you want to add, please go for it. But otherwise, we will take a 5-minute coffee break for everyone in the group.
No, I think that's it from me. But yeah, thanks for having me, and yeah, great to connect with everyone who's here today.
Yeah. Lovely. Thank you again, Simon. Cheers.